Let's talk play development. You ever ask yourself, why have OKC got so many great young players? I get it, especially as a fan of a struggling small market team myself. For teams that struggle to attract big name free agents, nailing the draft is their one real shot at long term success. Just ask Milwaukee and Denver, who climbed the mountain in recent years on the back of their drafted superstars. Now, every player, even greats like Giannis and Nikola Jokic, entered the league with a plethora of skills that needed sharpening. Physically, mentally, on-court skills, you name it. However, this isn't something us hoop fans acknowledge and understand consistently. The current hoops climate, where everyone and their dog rushes off to give draft day grades, yet discards prospects with as much grace as 6-year-old Andy Davis, is not a climate that views player development with much nuance. Mark Daignault puts it best.
Twitter is not a platform for progress. If you're focused on progress, the progress is slow, there's regression before there's breakthroughs. There's a lot more days that seem invisible and mundane. You don't build a really strong foundation by putting the drapes up and painting the walls. You build the foundation, and that's probably the most important part of the process.
So, to grow my understanding of player development, I've done a bit of research on what coaches and players have to say about that process. Let's jump in and see what I found. So, let's start with playing time, a universally agreed upon component of player development amongst NBA fans. You can't go a day on Twitter without someone complaining that their team's recent draft pick didn't play enough minutes. Well, the good news is that for the most part, NBA coaches and players agree with you. Various coaches, whether that's Kenny Atkinson, Jordi Fernandez, or Ken Carter, they've all talked about how on-court opportunity is the best vehicle for player development. The players also agree, as this perspective from Malik Monk shows.
But yeah, having freedom, I think that's the biggest thing in the NBA for a player to thrive, being comfortable. Because if you're free, you're comfortable. You know you can make a mistake and not look off your shoulder and come out the game. So that's the biggest thing with players coming into the league. When people say they bust or this, they just haven't had the opportunity as some guys have. So I'm getting the opportunity now.
However, even if Malik is right that most draft busts are caused by a lack of opportunity and freedom, that doesn't explain cases of relatively stagnant development like Jalen Green or Patrick Williams. Both of these guys were top 5 picks, and both have been given ample minutes by the team that drafted them. Well, that's because playing time alone doesn't equate to quality player development. Let's broaden our perspective. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know the name Lev Vygotsky, but this man was a demon in the field of developmental psychology. His groundbreaking 20th century work on sociocultural theory still holds up today. As far as relevance to basketball, one of Vygotsky's most famous theories, the zone of proximal development, pertains to human learning. And after all, player development is all about players learning more and more skills for the court. This diagram outlines a theory. Firstly, all possible skills are grouped into 3 zones. The innermost zone represents the skills we've already mastered and can thus execute independently. The middle zone, also known as the zone of proximal development, represents the skills that we can do with the assistance of others. Finally, the outermost zone represents skills completely beyond one's existing reach, even with help. The skills in the zone of proximal development, or ZPD for short, are thus considered the perfect level of challenge for pushing people forward. Another tenet of the theory is that as humans, we learn through interactions with other, more knowledgeable people. This isn't the most important part of the theory with regards to today's video, but if you think about it, it adds up. Just as students have teachers, young basketball players have vets, coaches, and developmental staff who all help pass knowledge down. Now, whilst coaches might not be quoting Vygotsky and his theories directly, A lot of them share similar philosophies towards development. Steve Clifford has previously discussed his development philosophy with Josh Robbins of The Athletic, describing how he wants players feeling good about things before they are challenged further. That idea of challenging players after they built a solid foundation has overlapped with Vygotski's ideas, where the zone of proximal development extends off people's already existing skills. Charlotte Hornets fans saw this philosophy in action last year with Brandon Miller. In his first few games as a Hornet, Miller's minutes were mostly spent spotting up, with the occasional creation play. Fast forward a few months of Miller shooting 40% from 3, and Miller was initiating all kinds of possessions at a meaningful volume. Take this game against the Knicks on January the 30th. Miller ran guard-guard pick and rolls, he ran pick and rolls with the screening center, and he even had some isolation possessions. Bringing it back to the ZPD, Clifford wanted Miller to prove that his spot-up shooting was clearly a skill he'd mastered, and hence a skill that translated to the NBA, before challenging him with skills inside his ZPD, such as on-ball creation. Even though Miller's efficiency naturally decreased with larger creation responsibility, he experienced valuable struggle in his rookie season that'll help his future development. Mark Daignault is another coach who has also shared some Vygotskian-esque philosophies to player development. In this quote, Daignault explains how OKC try and extend players beyond what they're capable of, that is, beyond the innermost zone. It's also key to note how Daignault describes development as a push-pull process. Whilst players need to be challenged and experience struggle to improve, the OKC staff don't want to overstress players with things they aren't ready for either. After all, there's too many stories of young players being overwhelmed on the court and consequently losing confidence. Some of them, like Jarrett Culver and Anthony Bennett, didn't get that confidence back. So, we've established that strong developmental staff properly evaluate their players' skill sets and identify the right skills to be challenged and developed. Now's the easy part. Design set plays targeted for specific skill sets and give the prospect minutes, right? Well, the problem is, most teams have multiple developmental projects, and these projects have their own, unique zones of proximal development. Let's take the fourth oldest team in the league, the Golden State Warriors. Despite the roster's relative age, the Warriors have multiple prospects such as Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, Trace Jackson-Davis, and Moses of Moody. However, each of these players have different skill sets, and thus they also have different ZPDs. Take Kuminga, who is emerging as a wing slasher. His next step is creating offense from a standstill. Hence, the Warriors recently have been giving him a volume of on-ball opportunities to ISO and pick and roll. And this investment in Kuminga's development has brought some fruit. Look at this patient re-screen and kick out against a really good point of attack defender in Ryan Dunn. On the other hand, Moody also needs development with the ball. After all, he's an improved slasher, as well as being a talented shooter. He even has some passing chops. This is an impressive two-man game rep, where he draws Şengün in with the second dribble before feeding a tough wraparound pass to Trace for the punch. However, the magnitude of the problem increases once you consider that ultimately, it's still Steph Curry and Draymond Green's team and system. In an interview with Mike Volkanov of The Athletic, Nick Nurse outlined that young players' development should intersect with the overall team's system, and that this was a core aspect of successful player development. It's been difficult enough for Steve Kerr to find the right way to use Kuminga around these two Bay Area legends. But feeding in play calls for Moses Moody on top of that? As a result of sharing the roster with Kuminga, and to a lesser extent Podziemski, Moody's development has fallen to the wayside. His minutes are limited, and when he does play, it's mostly in a spot-up role that doesn't really extend his development, as he's been in the same role offensively for the last few years. There are numerous situations like this around the league, where a formerly touted prospect doesn't get enough minutes or the right utilization when they do play, and hence, their production perceived development stagnates. With that said, Just because a player isn't playing NBA minutes or getting the right play calls when they do play, doesn't mean they can't improve. Certain skills, such as adjusting one's shot mechanics, should be repped out next to developmental coaches first, before they're translated to in-game reps. Many players also need significant physical development before they can reach their peak, which is also something obviously developed outside of game reps. For those with a trained eye, tangible skill and physical improvements are noticeable, even if it's only shown during garbage time. The players who keep improving despite not having that optimal ZPD-based development on court, those guys are great trade targets for other teams, and some of them might get covered in future videos on this channel. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment.